Evening and welcome to the Water Hour. I'm your host, Brigitte Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa. Has the electricity crisis driven your blood pressure up in the last few days? And what is its relevance to water? Which is more important? We'll be back in a moment with the SA Water Chambers, Benoit Leroy. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Benoit, good evening. Welcome to the show. We've had a few interesting, or shall I say, we've had a very interesting. It has been a while, indeed, it has, and we've had a very interesting week behind us, dare I say. I've never seen, we had the water crisis in Cape Town, and I know that the whole of Cape Town was in a frenzy, and it was amazing to see how people in Gauteng were rallying behind us to get us through the water crisis. And but I must say, in the last week, with the energy crisis on our doorstep, I have never seen so much frenzy all over social media about the energy crisis. And one wonders, is that energy misplaced? Because currently in Gauteng, you're facing what could be termed day zero. So if we have to start the conversation there, should we be in a frenzy about the energy or the water? Are they both important? How do the two mix at all?
Okay, so from my perspective, the water energy nexus are intertwined, so we can't really separate them. And in Gauteng, it's actually the most important in the country because all of our water is pumped. When I say all of it, over 95% of it is actually pumped up to the watershed. And so without energy, we don't have water. But the other thing is, what a lot of people don't realize is that the water is pumped up the Vaal through what was initially the biggest pumping scheme in the world to our power stations in Mpumalanga, and we only have two power stations in Limpopo where the water is not pumped, but one Medupi is not online, so waters is and energy work together whichever way we look at things, even in renewables. So in Gauteng, I was at a meeting last week which is called the GWA, the Gauteng Water Alliance, which is really using the excellent lesson learned and some of the same people were involved in the day zero crisis in Cape Town. And the reality is in Gauteng we have 5 years worth of water stored when the system is full. Cape Town has 2 years when it's full. So Cape Town's close to 2 years at the moment. Gauteng is close to two and a half, maybe 3 years. So we don't have an immediate crisis in Gauteng because we have water banked, and we have it banked from all over the place. We can talk about that maybe a bit later. But what we're doing in Gauteng is only because of day zero in Cape Town is that we're actually looking a few years ahead before the crisis hits us, whereas in the Western Cape, the tussle between local and national government left things too late. And it became a catastrophe potentially as opposed to a slow onset crisis, which Gauteng has. So from that perspective, Gauteng is pretty well off, although we mustn't take the foot off the pedal.
So here's an interesting question. You've currently got flooding in Gauteng, literally. why is there a crisis? Why is there a shortage of water in Gauteng if you've got flooding? Why are we not seeing the water levels in the Vaal Dam rising?
Okay, so Gauteng sits on top of the watershed divide. So it sits where there's no rivers, so to speak. There's no dams except a little bit lower, but those volumes are very, very small. So the reason why Gauteng as a mega city of 15 million people exists is because of gold. So water is pumped up to the Witwatersrand in old words. Now, when it rains here, the water actually goes on the southern, let's say the southern side of the divide runs right through Hillbrow, Berea, Observatory, down through the East Rand, and on the West Rand through Krugersdorp, Roodepoort. So you've got that watershed divide. There's no real water over there. So on the southern side, it actually flows down, generally speaking, to the Vaal River Barrage, which is downstream of the Vaal Dam. So that goes into the Orange, and if you look at the Orange River dams, so Gariep, etc., the levels haven't gone up yet. It's going to take a week for that to happen. On the northern side of the divide, which is the northern suburbs, Pretoria and the likes, that goes into the Crocodile River, which goes into Limpopo and into Mozambique and into the Indian Ocean. That water goes there. The water for Gauteng comes from the Vaal River system, and the catchment there is the Free State, KZN, and Mpumalanga. So Mpumalanga is a natural flow. Part of Free State is a natural flow. And then we get water from Sterkfontein, which has no catchment. That's pumped from Tugela uphill from KZN. And then we have from Lesotho Highlands, which is imported water from another country. And that water comes through from two different catchments in Lesotho through the tunnel that was just reopened. So Gauteng has, the rain in Gauteng is very similar to the rain in Cape Town, means nothing, means absolutely nothing, except for those who are able to do some rainwater harvesting and the likes.
So Gauteng is the economic heartland of South Africa, with a population of, 15 million people, roughly?
Yeah.
And that's huge. Cape Town, when we had day zero, we had the threat of 4 million people running out of water. 15 million people and the economic hub of South Africa. If we're not proactive about avoiding a day zero in Gauteng, what is the future looking like?
So if in very plain terms, if Gauteng saw day zero, that's a collapse of not South Africa, Southern Africa. That's SADC collapsed, and probably Sub-Saharan Africa's financial system collapsed. So that's why it's not going to happen. And yeah, we used to say Eskom was too big to fail. It has failed, but South Africa is a lot bigger than just Eskom. So if you have a look at, there's a frightening statistic that came out in a Gauteng Water Alliance last week. Is that Gauteng has 1.5 million people. This is not through birth. This is through urbanization coming into Gauteng every 5 years. So in the last 20 years, we have got more than Cape Town that came through to Gauteng, and we are water resilient. Cape Town, a lot of people were blaming the Eastern Cape immigration influx and the like. It's a penny. It's a drop in the ocean, so to speak, where there's lots of water, but it's actually not a factor. It's a very, let's say to me, that's out of bounds discussion. So urbanization is a global thing. We've got to accept it. So Gauteng has always been water scarce, has always been fully employed, virtually no unemployment. And it's been driven by mining. Now it's driven by the services industry, and still the biggest industrial hub in Africa. So our water that we need for Eskom, that we need for Sasol, is about 7-8% of Gauteng's water need. So it's quite a big chunk, but most of it is really for the cities to function. And the system is intricate, and it's run by the biggest water utility in the world, which is Rand Water. And Rand Water is sitting on, I think, close to 4.5 billion rands worth of cash. So it's one of the few state-owned enterprises that hasn't crashed and is not likely to crash in the immediate future. So we don't have the issues that Cape Town has, or that Nelson Mandela Bay has, or that Eskom has. And in actual fact, I think because we've got the 5 years of storage when we're full, yes, we've got late rains, is that we have the most sophisticated interbasin transfer system in the world, that people are just used to operating in this complex environment, and it hasn't eroded to the extent that outside of Gauteng has. And that's why the population is growing, because there is water, there is energy, there is work, and there is food. But the dams in Gauteng are over 110%, but 111% today. But that means nothing, because it's for small supplies in the outlying areas and for some of the agriculture. So we've in Gauteng, I think we've always been dependent on the outside in pumping water up. So I think that part of the operation is still functioning fairly well. It's not optimal, but it's fairly good.
So to address our water crisis in South Africa, I mean, Cape Town's been an uphill battle, and just let me ask you this question too. Can we say that the water crisis in Cape Town is over? Because that seems to be the perception on the ground. From your perspective, do we still have a water crisis in Cape Town?
So Cape Town is still classified as in a drought situation. There's a lot of questions around this, but at the Gauteng Water Alliance, we've got common denominators of people involved from the public and private sector, so it's not all government. And the reason why things aren't lifting in the Western Cape is that the rainfall in the catchment areas is not sufficient. So the drought is ongoing in the Western Cape. It's very much like Gauteng, where we've had the floods, but we still have a drought in our catchment areas. The Western Cape also has that, and the only reason why the Western Cape has been able to bank in the big dams, so like Theowaterskloof, has been able to bank that water, is that half the water is being consumed by the city at the moment. So it's about 650, 700 megaliters a day, which is just over half of what we'd normally use in summer. And also agriculture hasn't been given its full quota. So what's happening is, I believe, and this is not a Cape Town issue, this is a national government issue, it has maintained the drought restrictions to keep banking the water over 50% and not below 50%. That's a lesson learned, so they're being overcautious, but we could have a drought in Southern Africa for 10 to 15 years, so we could only be a third of the way through. So, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that the municipality is trying to milk the consumers. Well, there's nearly 10 billion outstanding in water, so I don't think that's the case. There's a huge cash flow crisis there. So South Africa's got droughts, and the problem is we're having rain in the wrong places. And that's always been the case. Climate change just makes it even more difficult to actually predict.
So over the last few years, since we've become since we are a water constrained economy, we've had a need for collaboration or collaborative efforts between national government and the community and business. And so you've recently launched the South African Water Chamber. Can you briefly tell us what the South African Water Chamber seeks to address, and how that can become a conduit for water in South Africa?
So I think what's very relevant is that the Day Zero crisis in Cape Town incubated the idea of elevating water as a national priority, because it really wasn't a national priority. It was viewed as an outlying priority. So that's the first thing. So we didn't let a good crisis go to waste, and we as a sector took it through to the Public-Private Growth Initiative, the PPGI, started by Rolf Meyer, and where sectors are participating in trying to revive each sector's agenda. And the PPGI is designed to overcome constraints between public and private, between the two sectors, so to speak, things like policy, regulatory issues, and contracting issues. And what happened is when we landed up in the PPGI's Water Shortage South Africa, we managed to convince the presidency that water was a national priority and a fundamental economic enabler on par with energy. And that penny only dropped in February this year when we presented that. And as a result, we managed to get support from something like 200 companies and organize ourselves as the South African water sector on the undertaking that government would organize itself, which it is doing, because through our pressure and through organization, the water and sanitation master plan was published. And, you know, whether it's a complete document or not, I don't think it's the issue. The issue is that the plan had been waiting for since 2014 was published. So the public and private sector are not at loggerheads. We're actually working together. And we can see that between national and provincial government and local government in the Western Cape, things are working a lot better than they used to. And when one sees the inside track, the results emulate that. One must take the politics out of it. There's a lot of politicking, etc. But when I'm involved with the people who are at the coalface, and both public and private, the politics are not discussed at all. None of us actually care about it, but we know they are an issue. So there's a common purpose. So from a private water sector perspective, we have a lot of muscle. We fare with that muscle, but when we speak, we are heard, and government is taking note and is working with us. And we've had some debates in public and the likes, and they've been fairly civil. So there's no antagonism, and we've involved with the advisors and the likes. We've also been involved with the National Planning Commission. Now, this is on top of the master plan. This is the strategic water resilience framework for the NDP. And this is an apolitical organization, yes, appointed by the president, that reports directly. Doesn't seem to have happened yet on the water side. I think it was supposed to happen last month, but I think it's imminent. And in that, we have got things like independent water regulation to give us regulatory certainty and all the likes. So, and Tito Mboweni, the Minister of Finance, is talking our language with the independent water regulator, and so are other ministries. So I'd like to think that our efforts in the water chamber are absolutely productive. And we've got a full mandate from the inaugural, let's say, cluster of the water chamber to pursue getting the other 200 members on board, you know, early next year, so that we can have, let's say, double what some of the biggest business organizations have, and this is just on water. So I'd like to think that water is being viewed as important as energy. In numbers, in companies, probably more, but I think they're as important. So we've made a lot of progress this year that we did not anticipate.
So, Benoit, in previous conversations, there was a lot of conversation about the finance. You know, we know that the Department of Water and Sanitation has had issues with finances and coming up with the funds to unlock water certainty. And one of the prerequisites for the partnership was that we have policy certainty. How is that coming along?
You know, the irony is that local government is actually where the master plan realities lie. So local government spends just below 100 billion a year on water-related services, and national government about 15 to 18 billion a year. So national government produces the master plan, so the strategy, because it is the custodian of water and it is the producer of bulk water. But the wholesale and retail, in actual fact, much like energy, is at local government level. So it's actually it's quite ironic the way it's turning out. So from a policy certainty perspective, we can tick that box half, or maybe 2/3, because the master plan is out. So the plan is there, the peg is in the ground, the skeleton is there, it needs to be worked and massaged as we go through. The difficulty is that national government has very little sway over provincial and local government. And that complicated governance structure is embedded in the constitution. So we're busy working, not trying to find, we're busy working through ways of easing that complicated architecture. And it was done to an extent with the IPP, Independent Power Producers, through NERSA, but you had a single buyer, which was Eskom, whereas with water, you've got 280 buyers or 270 buyers. Each municipality is a different legal entity. So it's a far more complex, but we are working on that. So policy certainty is there. Regulatory certainty is not there because we don't have a regulator. And the regulatory function is a very minor function in the Department of Water Sanitation, which is the custodian. So the custodian can't regulate itself in producing water. There's no price regulation, there's no volumetric regulation, and there's no quality regulation. Although one could argue that national government should be doing that through the Blue and Green Drop, which will be relaunched next year. So from a regulatory perspective, the National Planning Commission is insisting on an independent water regulator. Treasury is doing that. COCTA is doing that. Department of Water Sanitation will cooperate in time, and I think we will do that over the next couple of years in an organized fashion, because nobody is going to put private equity into regulatory certainty. So we're making strides there. The contracting certainty is the most difficult one because most municipalities are uncontracted where it exists. It's they have low credit ratings. So and the cash flows are issue, and water is used for other things, so is energy. So what we've got is a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, that you've heard Fred and Tony talk about a lot, and that has been adopted by Treasury. It's been worked through the Development Bank of South Africa, and whereby what we do is we aggregate the good, the medium, and the bad municipalities together into a special purpose vehicle, and all the grant funding goes into there, and a blended finance option of public and private money, because the fiscus doesn't have sufficient, goes into the special purpose vehicles, and the revenues generated out of those water projects goes back into those vehicles. So the municipalities do not have, or will not have, the ability to tap into those funds. The excess funds, so in a franchise fee, if you want to call it, will go back into the municipalities for cross-subsidization and the like. But the SPVs would be controlled, let's say, by catchment management area, where there would be the skills to contract. Because the other problem with local government is, outside of half the uni-cities and the rest of the municipalities, they don't have the technical and commercial and accounting staff and, let's say, legal staff to actually contract with the private sector. So unlike the IPP office. So that would be manned up with the required staff to do it on a regional basis, so that the contracts could be equitably rolled out. There's an element of that happening in Cape Town with USAID and the likes. So these models are not new models for the world, and for Africa, they've been used to a certain extent. South Africa, it's fairly new, but there's a lot of buy-in, and DBSA, the Development Bank of South Africa, been appointed legally as the program managers for the SPVs on behalf of Treasury. So not just for water, but for other things too. So the so-called PPP, or public-private partnership model, is going to roll out because the fiscus is pretty dry. And so that's where most of the complicated work is. You know, there's money around in the private sector looking for good projects. There are technical skills, implementation skills. It's just a matter of the frameworks being bankable. We've got the banks on board also in the water chamber. And so we've got the Green Bank on board as one of the inaugural members in our steering committee. So there's a lot of buy-in from the public and private sector, So we're busy working through the detail, and it does take time.
Sure. Can we touch for a brief minute on augmentation strategies? Augmentation was a hot potato in Cape Town with the water crisis. So, what are the augmentation strategies that Gauteng will be employing?
So in Gauteng, we're pretty much behind Cape Town when it comes to water efficiency. So we're losing anywhere near the national average of 41% in unaccounted for non-revenue water. So of that, 35% is established as leaks. So in Mfuleni, it's over 60%, for example, which is part of Gauteng. So the lowest hanging fruit is to put pressure management into the system, which Cape Town started 15 years ago and saved 70 to 80 megaliters or million liters a day. So Gauteng is busy gearing up to do that. So Joburg is over 12 billion rand is the number that's used just to start at Joburg. We've got Tshwane, we've got Ekurhuleni, that together are bigger than Johannesburg. So there's quite a significant investment. And the reason we've got to do that is it would be over 100 billion rand just to replace the network. And that's not going to happen very quickly. And this is a global problem. Everybody's been delaying the replacement of the network. So manage the pressure to manage the demand. And we can save the equivalent of, let's say, a Johannesburg population over the next 15, 20 years. Just so 4.5 million people or 10 million people or 15 million in Gauteng, we can do that quite easily through pressure management. So that's an efficiency thing. The technology is fairly simple. The work is not sophisticated. It's civil engineering, mechanical engineering, and software engineering. Then in parallel, what's busy being designed is water reuse. And we have very large volume of water that we can reuse from some large sewage works in Gauteng. So they make it very economical, and that is going to add something like 3 to 5 rand a cubic meter, which is below the price we're paying at the moment in bulk water. So that's a low-hanging fruit. What it also does is it sorts out the eutrophication issues. So the organic load that's being discharged into the northern and southern catchment areas. The third one is smaller, but it's causing an issue, is acid mine drainage, which is polluting the southern watershed divide. And that volume of water technology has been used for a decade and a half already in the coalfields in Mpumalanga, in the mining. With the gold, it's a bit more polluted, but that technology is well proven. It's South African homegrown technology. It's world-leading technology. And what we do is we would desalinate the acid mine drainage, so we wouldn't need Lesotho Highlands to dilute that pollution. That's the first thing. And secondly, it's water that can be put, like seawater desalination, straight into the network. Doesn't need storage or anything like that. Theoretically, if we were able to dewater all of the disused mines, we can then use them to actually store water. So when there are aquifers also. So there's those three initiatives which are fairly well down the path of planning at the moment. And we're going to see next year some announcements coming out, and they'll probably take 5 to 7 years to roll out efficiently. Although the water demand, so through pressure management, 2 to 3 years, we can get major strides done. The reuse will take 4 to 7 years, and the AMD probably 3 to 4 years. So all of them have to start in parallel, and hopefully we can start a lot of the EIAs, for example, have been done for the reuse work and acid mine drainage already. So there wouldn't be delays from that perspective.
Awesome. So it's good news. It's not all doom and gloom. When we listen to the news, it can sound very depressing because all we hear is about the water shortage, the crisis. But it's great to get a balanced view and to know that there are plans afoot to negate a possible day zero in Gauteng and to stabilize the economy, basically.
Yes, and I think the last week we've seen that the collapse of Eskom is real. Half the fleet is down, and you know, it's no use bleating about the reasons. It's taken 20 years to get there, but that has to be sorted out, and the only way is to have private involvement. There's no, you can't fix what's broken. It's so broken, and the 2 new power stations are just not coming online for a whole host of reasons, and they all stem out of Eskom themselves. So I think we're going to see a liberalization of the energy generation side, and the water side, a collaboration between the public and private side to learn the lesson, because the hole that we have that we cannot service in energy is 450 billion plus. The investment for the whole of South Africa for water and sanitation is double that. So water is a far bigger endeavor. It's a far slower endeavor, and the two have to work together. So with the water, we mustn't make the same mistakes, and I don't believe we will, because we should have learned the lessons. And I think we're going to see a change of philosophy whereby the state doing everything we've shown cannot do it, and that you have to collaborate with the private sector. The private sector is there to make money, and it knows how to do it, can do it a lot cheaper, a lot quicker, a lot more effectively, and satisfy and put money into pensions and salaries and employ people, and not be a drag on the fiscus. Actually contributes to the fiscus while doing that. So in water, maybe the delays are good to an extent, that we've learned this lesson. And I think energy we're going to see next year will be totally privatized. Liberalized and privatized. Water will not be privatized, but it will be a collaboration, because that's a national asset. Energy is not a national asset. And that's why government's trying to hold on to energy at the moment, because like it tried to hold on to SA, now SA is privatized. You know, when it's in business administration, that's private hands, and it will do what needs to be done. So in water, we can do it together, I think, quite well, and everybody will benefit from it. So I think it's a win-win, but we got to start moving next year with a few important flags into the ground.
Awesome. Benoit, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hopefully everybody can see there is some hope and there's some method in what we're doing.
For sure. And thank you for the great work that you're doing with the SA Water Chamber. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we will be back again sometime. Thank you for, and have a great evening further, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.